All right, let's see if anyone's out there tonight and we can answer some of your questions. Anybody have any questions tonight? And let's see. All right. Tonight we are going to, we'll talk about the questions that you have. And if you don't have any questions, then we'll surface a topic and we'll just talk about that topic. Please let me know if you have any questions. We'll do 30 minutes tonight, and see if anyone else is on. All right. Okay, so tonight what we're going to do, if you have questions, please type them in there. Tonight we're going to, basically is a question and answer session, so whatever employment questions you have, please annotate them in the chat block, and then we'll go through them and answer them if I need to go online, and we'll surf the internet and look at some of the jobs that you may have questions with. As well, we can choose a topic. One of the topics that comes to mind is the use of first ever in your resume. I see a lot of transitioning military who will put a lot of first ever or picked above all others, something to that effect for a lot of their narrative in the job descriptions. And it's interesting when you start looking at a lot of resumes and you see first ever all the time. You really have to watch and use that term sparingly, because the first ever term is a little dangerous to use, because if you overuse it, then it may imply that let's just say that if you read through someone's resume and every job they've held, they have first ever, I was the first to ever do something. I was the first to ever do this. I was the first to ever do that. Or I was selected specifically for this job. Things like that over and over and over again. It's really just too much. And it conveys something negative versus positive. So what it conveys, if you use it too much, is it conveys that your employers in the past may not have wanted you in the position you were in, so they created one for you. Or they moved you to a position that never existed. Or a lot of, if you use it quite a bit throughout your resume, what it implies is you were in quite a few jobs that your bosses needed to move you into a job that they had just created for you. And that doesn't actually look as good as what you think it would look, right? It actually looks a little negative. What I would try to do if that was my resume is I may use first ever. As I was the first to ever serve in this position, things like that, and try to put some narrative around it, some context. But if I found that I used that term over and over and over again throughout every job that I'd held, at that point, there's somewhat of a problem that I need to reword some of my text. I mean, it's definitely a challenge, and it's something that you just have to work on. But you can't use that all the time. Is that have you anyone out there seen that before? Is that do you have that in your resume that you would like to talk about today? If so, we can chat on that. One thing that you might want to do when you start getting into the habit of doing that, because, I mean, look, granted, it's probably true that you were the first ever to do these things. Because, look, in a service, we change missions all the time. There's different priorities all the time. And so one week you'll have one priority, and next week you'll have another priority. And if you change jobs or you deploy, then yes, you're probably going to be the first ever to do certain things. I would use those and save those up sparingly. All right? And make it impact really hard. But I would not repeat that over and over and over again for every job. Because what that implies is that, if you were the first ever to work in this position, and then you were the first ever to work in the last position, and you were the first ever to work in the position before that, then what it conveys is that you had a very difficult time complying or working in the position that you were actually assigned, so someone created one for you. All right? So you're just going to have to try to work through that if that occurs, and not use first ever all the time throughout your resume. All right? You're going to have to change it up a little bit. Now, what you can do is, let's say you replace that. If you were really always selected for some new position every time you moved, then one option for you would be to, instead of say first ever, then quantify everything like you probably already have. Now, if you do that, what that implies is, right now, if literally you were the first ever to work in certain positions and you already have the information quantified, well, of course, you can sit there and say that you increased production or increased something by a certain percentage. All right? Because basically, if the job never existed before you actually served in it, then the statistics that you achieved would be compared to 0%. So whatever percentage of effectiveness you had in that job, I would say that you just figure up as the percentages from 0. So for instance, if the job existed before you got into it, then let's just take, for instance, if a person was in that position before you and did 0 production. Now, you came into the job and exceeded it. All right? So that would be the difference. That would be the increase. And that's what you would want to show. And you could literally do that ethically, because if you were the first ever to serve in that position, then you increased the production or the quality of work by however much percent based on the previous person. And if there was no previous person, then you're basing it off of 0 production. All right, does that make sense? I mean, that's just one way to try to build a strategy around that when you kind of get caught into selected over peers, first ever to serve, different terms like that. Sometimes if they're overused, they just convey something a little different than what all of us are meaning it to convey. So anyone have any questions out there that we can answer? If you do, type them into the chat block, and we'll search for them. Whether that's a USA jobs, federal government jobs, defense contracting jobs, corporate jobs, resume, cover letter, interview preparation, networking, job searching, leadership transition. That's one issue that we run into all the time is a leadership transition. I have quite a few individuals who contact me and talk about how they have achieved the interview numerous times, but the employers never hire them. And the comment after the interview is, we are not sure that you actually have transitioned. And what that means is you still are conveying a military hardcore presence, and you kind of have to lighten up. And one way to make that happen is the scenarios that you use when you're speaking or answering in the interview. So, for instance, if the hiring manager behind the interview panel says to you, so tell me a time when you did such and such, when you led people in a complex situation and you achieved the mission. Okay, well, look, all of us we can all relate to that. Now, if you are interviewing in a corporate world, what you would not want to do is say, well, when I was the platoon sergeant, I had 4 squads and we, took the hill. It was at Reforger in, Europe, and, we marched for 10 miles and whatever. You don't want to use those military examples. Or you don't want to use military examples using military terms. All right? So, for instance, for this individual, what may have happened is he said, well, I took my subordinates and we went to the field and we had this and that and this and that. Well, the problem is in the civilian world, the word subordinates is actually a somewhat negative term. Everyone's basically your coworker. And so if you are using subordinates in your interview, then that might be an indicator that you have not transitioned. All right. If you are referring to the troops, the soldiers, subordinates, and you as the senior leader, as in, I'm in charge and this is what we did and I told my guys to do this and they did it, and that is an indicator you have not transitioned. Okay, so it behooves you to change the voice track a little bit, make it a little softer, make it a little more corporate. And then, think of if you had your family out there instead of the soldiers. How would you relate to that? You're not going to tell your family what to do. They'll walk off and just leave you out there by yourself. Well, that's what the employer doesn't want. The employer doesn't want to hire somebody who has not transitioned well because they're afraid of 2 things. Either the workers in their organization, in their company, will leave because of you, or they will report you, for different different reasons. They don't like the way you speak to them. You're condescending, right? Equal opportunity, civil rights. All of this goes into that. And so you have to remember that what your example conveys has to convey something on a collaborative playing field. All right, with coworkers. If you think of how can I relate my military experiences when I'm answering these interview questions based on, I base every answer on a military example. However, the language I use is a collaborative language with coworkers. All right. You know, if you can do that, then they know you're at least trying to transition. All right, everyone knows that it's very difficult, but you have to try. And if you use those terms, then you know you've tried. I mean, just think of this. When you transition and you are supervising or managing, they're two different things. On the outside, the challenge at that point is that the people who you supervise are not obligated to listen to you as in the UCMJ, right? So they are not under the UCMJ. So if you tell them something that they don't feel is ethically correct, they have the right to question you, and they have the right to go into the different, different employers. They can go to your seniors and talk to them and things like that. And so there's not really a chain of command. All right, and you can't call it a chain of command. It's not really a chain of command. All right, so everyone works in a collaborative environment. All right, things like that. Does anyone have any questions? Again, if you have any questions, that's what this 30 minutes is for. Please ask your questions. I know if you're working on your resume and you're out there, or you're preparing for this week and you have a couple interviews, things like that, this is a great opportunity to ask the questions and see what happens. You know, we can talk about the job searching efforts, USA Jobs. We can talk about federal, defense contractor, any of that stuff. Whatever you have on your mind, employment-wise, then type it in the block. If you're on your desktop, it's on the right-hand side, and we can talk about that and work through it. So, all right. So some of the other things that we can look at is, what are your skill sets? Now, your skill sets in the military can relate to the civilian world. All right, so a lot of the skill sets that you have and additional duties that you have do relate to the civilian world. You just break them down a little bit further than the title. All right, break it down into kind of the subtasks. That's what I would call it. If you break it down into different subtasks, then it will make a little more sense. Okay. It'll make a little more sense, and you'll be able to relate it to some of the questions that you're asked and within your resume. You know, so break down those different elements. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, let's say if you're the armorer, then break it down by weapon system. All right. If you break it down by weapon system, then there are quite a few jobs out there that potentially would list the different weapon systems in the requirements or the description of the job. All right. They may not call the job that they currently have open as an armorer, but as an armorer in the past, you touched a lot of different weapons. You were qualified to work in the arms room, and you were qualified to work on a lot of different types of weapons. So break it down, break those job titles down and those job descriptions down into pieces, and then use those pieces to shape your voice track and shape your resume. All right. Okay, so let's see. Do you have any questions at all? Because if not, then we will keep this a little short tonight, and we'll come back next Sunday and see if anybody has any questions. I'll just wait a few more minutes just to see if you have any employment questions. If not, and if you have the chat block there, just put no questions, and then we'll close the session tonight, and then we'll see if anybody has any questions next Sunday. All right. Well, that's good. I really appreciate you showing up tonight, and hopefully the little tips helped. And if you have questions, remember, every Sunday night from 8 to 8:30, I'm on YouTube Live and can answer your questions. And if you have questions that requires us to go online onto the internet, obviously we're already on it, so we'll just share the screen. We'll go to the website of your choice, and we can walk through whatever questions you have and give you the best answer possible. All right. All right. So, well, we have a second. Okay. So, do you have any questions? No. All right. Well, that finishes it tonight, and hopefully we'll see you next Sunday, and we'll have more tips every Sunday. But the reality is, if you have any questions, we're trying to get you over the hurdle over the weekend so you can finish whatever preparation you're trying to finish before Monday. And that's why we're doing it Sunday night. All right. So whatever questions you had over the weekend, burning questions, you need answers before Monday morning, this is the opportunity. All right. All right. So we'll see you next week, and good luck this week on any of your hiring actions.